What I, what I want to do tonight, because I was educated in a couple different ways, and this whole thing about painting is explained rather by this very strange thing that I'm about to show you. And it's, you know, I did this thing with a marketing guy, and it was because as I was president of the Guild, I wanted to know, I figured that our biggest problem at the Guild, not selling enough pictures, was marketing. But I thought marketing was something like sales, like convincing people to come and buy pictures. And he said, that's a different thing. Marketing is something else. And I said, show me. And he started asking me questions. And I'm going to get into that in just a second, but I'm going to do it by way of, I'm going to take you for a little bit of a ride through my background first. And let's just see if that'll work. The beginning of this, my beginning in painting was as a 5-year-old looking at this painting in a grade school in a town that doesn't exist anymore. I looked it up yesterday to remind myself about it and how big it was when I was there and stuff. And Wiki, whatever it is, says there's no such place. So it was eaten up. I'm from the Aurora area, Aurora, Colorado. So this is way east of Aurora, between Watkins and a place called Sable. Ever heard of funny names like that? They all got eaten up by this monster called Aurora. But nevertheless, there was what you might call a one-room schoolhouse there. It had a partition down the middle, and there were, I think, the first 4 grades. That's who I was with when I was that age. But I remember looking at this picture, and it took me like about 10 years ago, I suddenly realized that was my introduction to painting. I remember looking as a 5-year-old at the part that wasn't painted, the smeary paint, and looking back at the nose, and looking down at the smeary paint again. And I got really interested, but I can't tell you I ever thought about it much beyond that, except that I just started looking at pictures. So that's the beginning, and that sort of maybe even it explains my enthusiasm for uncovering this form in our times, which some people would probably suggest are, we're living in the past. I think we're not, actually. I think I can probably explain why we're not. But this is the kind of stuff that made me want to be a painter to start with. But my training was academic, you might say. So this is what you call an academic painting. It was started, this is the way it would start. This is a piece of brown paper, a big sheet of brown paper. We would paint that, we'd set up still lifes, and the mentality of Sir Joshua Reynolds was the byword there. A person, he said, who can paint a still life can paint anything. And it's a really sound principle in the sense of, for example, composing a portrait. The one you're looking at over here, it's nothing like the level of composition that a still life requires. And but that's the academic training I received. But before that, I'd actually studied with an impressionist. And so this is the modern world all coming together in one person. It has to anyway, in my mind. But one of the things we're dealing with right now is a return of Western art to its roots. What some people now are calling realism, but it's the event of the times. Modern art has faded. It's gone. The schools, they're all still dominated, known by them. But the whateverness, if you want to call it that we found in the arts is causing its own demise, But this principle is long-lasting, like, eternal principle of beauty and truth. And especially the truth about ourselves, is really a big deal. It doesn't go away. And it certainly caught me as a little kid, and I just never turned left or right. But so this picture is painted in an entirely different way. This is painted as an impressionist would paint, and then but the way I paint as an impressionist, I can push it to any level of what you'd call realism. So in one sense, there's no difference at all. But there's a huge difference once you get to know the games involved and the seeing involved. There's so much greater depth in a picture like this that I can only explain to you that there's greater depth. I can't convince you. It's one of the funny things about painting. You can't understand what I'm talking about until you paint it, till you actually pick up a brush and really work at this. But you can have hints about it, and you can wonder a whole lot. There are guys from time to time, like the poet Paul Valery, who would get somewhat close, and then Degas would just tell him to shut up. But this is actually how we start. So you can see a little bit, maybe potentially, of a Monet mentality going on. This is hitting color notes first. You know, Ang, one of the great 19th century, the 18th century, into the 19th century, his comment was, a painting well drawn is well enough colored. But once you get to Monet, we've all discovered that isn't true. All the very best minds of the time switched over and started painting. They went to visit Monet. They started talking about color and light, and the whole thing changed. And what most people did is they tried to come up with some combination, which is what I've done as well, although I haven't, in one sense, done it aggressively. I'm just looking for best practices to make whatever I see in front of me. The Boston School is the product of that thinking. They were all educated over in Europe. Most Americans were. These guys were born in 1860, so somewhere around that era, and so they were over there before the 1900s were even introduced, and they painted through most of them into the 30s or 40s. But their background was pretty standard European, classic training. One of the interesting things you might want to know about is that they were studying in, hey, could I get somebody to turn on some little light somewhere? Back in the background there, is there anything somebody can give me? I'll tell you what, I really have a hard time speaking when I can't see people. I feel like I'm talking to the air. By the way, I have to tell you that we're making a video tonight. This is, Mr. Producer is recording this just for fun. We do a lot of variety of type of stuff, so. Is that you, Chris? No, if the doorway or something had, or even if the outside light was on. If it's not possible, it's okay. Don't labor too much. I'll keep talking to the air. I'd like to see expressions. I want to know if I'm communicating or not. All right. Oh, gee. Anything but that. Hey, Tim. That's better. Leaving the outside on, that's a little better. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I think that does help, actually. Thank you. Is that good? Still good up there? Okay. Thank you. I can barely make out some expressions now. But what Ang, I-N-G-R-E-S, Eleanor's dad, who's French, pronounced it anger. What he said was a painting well drawn is well enough colored. That really did change when you got to Monet. And of course, it wasn't a thing that everybody always believed either. I mean, we have the great Veronese way back, it's still possibly the greatest colorist of all time, but it was color. It was a huge part of what rocked his boat, I guess you'd say. So, but what you're seeing here is not academic. What we did with Gamel was we did drawings like this. This is actually on brown paper, and it's just some red chalk and some blue chalk and some yellow chalk. But it was mostly charcoal first. And then we literally put paper over it, like tracing paper, and we traced the lines. And then we stretched the canvas to match the size. And then we started painting between the lines. I mean, classic, if you want to call it that, classic, mural painting or something, But so all the drawing was accomplished. At one point, though, Gamel was the guy I was studying with in Boston, who was the introducer of this information to me. I was painting a picture with him, and he had taught us an expression. He said, they have an expression called, you have to paint as if you're coming out of a fog, and he had this whole expression called lost and found. And at one point I painted an edge of the painting out, and you couldn't, he just happened to come in the room. That's why I just painted this, pushed, say the white passage that you can see here, I'd push the white passage like that out into the background, and I was gonna come back and draw it. And he said, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You'll never get back your drawing. But there was some of that sort of, if you want to call it that, built in to the academic model. But mostly the academic model was one that was imaginative. You were making up figures all the time. You had to do drawings, you had to make up stuff, and then you glued them together to make them look like they're in a plausible painting. It's just a different thing. As soon as you get to the impressionist world, as soon as you get to painting what you see as a totality, the whole thing changes, and the methodologies must change with it. So, and that's that's the world I live in. But I am trying to give you a bit of a bio. So that's that. And this painting was painted like that. In fact, the reason I have, if you look at it, there's a start down here. In fact, even there's a landscape down there where you can see what 2 hours looks like. You know what I mean? It's just it's all about the color and the values, and the drawing comes. And it's a fascinating model. But this is a very elaborate thing. Somebody asked me, by the way, and I'm going to answer it now because I'm thinking about it. You said, how many hours does a painting take you? She did. It was you, yes. and I said, well, this painting you're going to be talking about tonight is about 40 hours. But typically that's what I can do. About 40 hours is what it takes to get all the information I can possibly want for what the concept is that I'm trying to get across. But I don't have a model that's the realist model. I'm not trying to noodle every little eyelash on a face or something like that. In fact, realism is kind of destructive. By the time you get it to looking like a photograph, you've just lost the game. You know what I mean? In other words, what painting is, frankly, is interpretive. It's actually drawing forth from nature. It's not nature. As Degas would say, nature is just the starting place. It's just the field. So this thing was laid in like that. These two laid in the same way. It's an entirely different world, as you can see, from the world of the academic. Now the portrait in the middle, this is my daughter Chloe. I meant to bring that, I forgot. I call it Chloe in the Sky with Diamonds, for anybody who knows Chloe. But she sat for me a number of times, and I think I completed 2 pictures. One far less to my satisfaction, but this is the one she would sit for. But I was gradually building in the idea of a star being born. I'd bought her a Hubble. She was interested in the Hubble telescope stuff. And I was finding pictures in this background here, literally is supposed to be a star being born. And who doesn't think of their daughter or son as that nonsense, I mean, wonderfulness. But in any case, she sat and sat. What you're seeing over here is actually nebula and stars on her dress and stuff, pretending to be sequins and stuff. So it's just a little bit of a play. But this one was done earlier and much more in the academic mode. And before I'd fully moved over to the other way of thinking, this was done exactly like, this wasn't done with cutout outlines and all that sort of thing. Just so you know, I don't want to take all night because I got to show you this little video and talk about points about what this really is about. And I know some significant number of you here actually have somebody yourself or somebody who messes with this stuff. So I'd like to communicate a little bit. But you see the portrait on the right is the way, this is a demonstration. So this is 2 hours of, and you can see that what you're going for here is, this is called what Delacroix would call painting from the middle tones. I remember when we were students, we would sit on this idea of what Degas meant and what Sargent meant for painting from the middle tones. But if you do all your reading, you'll find out that Delacroix talks about it and actually even explains it. But it's not painting from the details. It's from the greater masses and the greater movements of value and color. And that's what you're seeing here. So what we're doing when we do this is we're going after the truth of major things. And so the significant line like this portion here, this would be important because it's the top and bottom of the painting, and you have to establish points. And by the way, that's another Sargent conversation that comes up in this whole thing. I don't know when to say some of this, but hopefully it'll come up. I'll say it now, though, but the idea, he talks about points and angles. And so what we're always talking about, and the whole construct of a thing like this is based on the idea of setting up a top point here and a low point down here as parameters, getting them situated well left and right, and getting other points. They're called floating points. And you go around and establish points like this, and then something like this. And I established them. My mentality eventually became to establish them the way they look from the beginning. It doesn't mean you're noodling them up, as we say. It doesn't mean you're drawing them in with fineness. It just means you're articulating them to look like what they look like. The light effect, the sharpness of the edge, and the color relations are true. But these things are floated in various places. And, well, in the meantime, there's just a long, big movement. Any kind of great movements of color is a priority, not every little piece of color. So, and even with a guy like Monet, you'll see that he's using lots of bits of color, but you can see he's painting the blue sky. It's not looking like 400 notes in the limited sense of that idea. So, and by the way, as soon as I go do the video over there, you can just ask questions about this stuff as you like, and I'm very eager to have a conversation that actually makes a connection with you. It really looks terrible up there. The oval over here, there's a husband and wife and their 2 kids. There was one of the more recent paintings that I've done. I've never worked from photographs, by the way. I don't do it. I don't find anything pleasurable about it, fun about it. There's nothing about it that's anything that I want to do, and I never have done it. I refuse to do it. I say to people when they ask me to paint their portrait, I say, no, you need to get somebody else. And I said, well, they say, why? And I said, because you don't want to do sittings. And this is really low. I said I want 15 to 20 sittings. Live sittings of 2 hours each, minimally. And no, we want you. If that's good, I've never had anybody run away, but they really don't know what they're in for. But the silly thing is that virtually every painter that's ever painted does it in way more sittings than 15 or 20 sittings. There's a mercy in the way of working of the Boston School, and that is to say the mentality of going after majors and staying big. And that is, you can do it in less time. And there are, of course, historical predecessors for that. People like Van Dyck were painting heads, albeit somewhat formular in color and that sort of thing, in 9 hours. Less than as few as 3 sittings. By the way, that previous one this is a 9-hour portrait, by the way. Most of my portraits are 9 hours. That one actually I did because the sitter, I had just been working a professional portrait, and I was having such a horrible time. I just got done with it, feeling miserable about the whole thing. And I hired a model to just sit for me. I said, what is wrong? You got to figure out what's wrong with your basic practices here. And I hired this model, and 9 hours later I had this. So I said, no, that's silly. Okay, so I hired her again. And 9 hours later I had another one. The family wanted it right there on the spot. So it was all good stuff. But I said, okay, so there is such a thing as bad models, bad sitters. Hire dancers to do your sittings for you. People have good at body awareness and things like that. So let me just tell you a few more things just in general before I get on. Some of the training is memory training. So the pictures on the wall, these right 2 over here, those are memory paintings. I got fewer than 20 seconds. I was driving a car typically. And if you don't want to die, you can't look much longer than 20 seconds. You might be able to blink a couple times. But the bottom one there on this picture is done with, it's a rearview mirror image. And so you have a training of the memory that goes with this territory is all I'm trying to say. And it's typical from the very beginning. Early training was training you to draw a figure. We used photographs and we memorized the figure, but then when we ever drew from the model, we also would do memory drawings of that afterwards. So there's a big element of that here, and I just wanted to mention that as one of the pieces of this training. There's a whole ton more to it, and I take people through it. I also want to show you, though, that the application I make of the way I paint is applicable to everything. So landscapes, still lifes, portraits, and anything else you want to do. The picture up there on the left, the figure, the nude, is a imaginative figure. So, and that's in the class of what, if you were trying to win the Prix de Rome in the academic world back in the day, you would go into the room to do the painting with no models of any kind. Everything was done like that, out of your head. And those things to look at, it's very pretentious. Those guys, there's nothing happening in my training that would have prepared you for what they were doing. It's just not the same world anymore. But these are just a couple ones there, a little bit. The one on the left is a tiny little thing on River Road, and this one on the right is the Oliverian. And that one down there is on Lily Pond Road. That's a start, that one underneath the larger picture. But just to bring it home a little bit to us, I'm trying to get through this quicker. This is showing the process. This is the workshops that I do. This is the kind of stuff you're going to see in those workshops by somebody who has a little bit of skill at getting things in the right place. But that's a pastel workshop. But just for that brief second, I just want to talk about the Boston School, and then I'm going to take you off to my painting, okay? So, but this is so the Monet experience was a remarkable thing. The guy did study in an academic place, and his story is that he was working on a figure. He was told to draw the figure. His need was to learn to draw the figures. He was busy drawing the figure, and when the teacher came through, and it was a guy named Glare who had a lot of influence, he said, "Why are you drawing it like that?" He said, "Did you need to make? You see, it should be 8 heads high," and blah blah blah. And he went and started describing Greek figures. At which point, of course, Monet left because he was already invested in a different way of thinking. And this whole world had shifted dramatically out of that storytelling, history, illustration, church illustration, all that stuff. The world had already started moving really away from that. But there were tons of people coming out of the Dutch background. They were already painting from, it was slice of life. The genre pictures they did were women in kitchens and all that sort of thing. And And that's where Monet had that connection, a guy named Boudin, and I'm not going into that history. But what you get with the Boston School guy, so this is a Tarbell, and I'm only going to talk about Tarbell for 2 seconds, but this is a Tarbell that was at the Hood for a very long time. I thought they owned it, but they don't, unfortunately, so we're not looking at it down there anymore. But you can see the connection. He's just using a bunch of figures outdoors, but it's the same mindset as the Monets. You can see that. And then, but a guy like that, you can see he can do a whole bunch of other things, but they brought it indoors and began to do interiors. And I'm just telling you all this stuff because I'm about to explain a way of working that is very close to the Boston School. Nobody paints, by the way, and I hope not anyway, that paints precisely the way their teacher painted. You have to figure out painting for yourself, and you have to find best practices for yourself. But this background is that where the people they had learned to draw. They weren't incompetent. The proportions look good, but they also were trying to combine what some people would refer to as the atmospheric unity of the world when it's taken as just a slice of life sitting in front of you. And if you stop thinking of it as this figure and that table and this other thing over here like you would do if you're an imaginative painter, all of a sudden there are way better practices. They speed up the process, but they put you on a whole different track, and the track is the beauty of the impression, of the visual impression, for its own sake. That goes all the way back to Velázquez. You have to look that up. I've done a whole bunch of videos, by the way. I've done 460, was it, Mr. Producer? Something like that now. Oh, Mr. Producer, how could I forget? Jimmy C., Adam C., Linda K., thank you for your ongoing contributions. I'm throwing it in there, Whitaker, I thought of it. That's one of those things I have to do in these videos, is people provide some money, just enough to pay Mr. Producer to do these videos. I don't make any. What was I saying? What?
Drawing but using the atmosphere.
Yeah. And so what you're dealing with now is a whole different world. So what happens is the whole process changes, just completely changes. And so Monet's just doing that thing, whatever that is. He's just hitting notes outdoors. The drawing is. In fact, I studied the impressionist I worked with in New York was and I spent 3 years with an impressionist and 3 years with an academic. So, and I'm talking about guys who knew what they're talking about in both cases. The academic guy actually worked a little bit with the same background, the character named Hawthorne, who had learned from Monet, or with Monet. Monet didn't teach, but people would go there and process his information. I forgot what I was saying. All right. So, but nevertheless, these guys started taking it indoors. And if you look at the rest of the Boston School guys, which would be Joseph DeCamp and Benson notably, Frank Benson notably, you'll have a lot of fun. Gamble wrote a book called The Boston Painters, the guy I studied with. He was also a writer. And you could look that up if you ever want to know any more about this little world here. But he also has this skill here. And this is possibly one of the great paintings, one of the most distinguished paintings in American portraiture. But it's a portrait of a judge, and it's far better than you see here in this photograph. But it's a portrait of a judge, appellate Judge Hammond, in the appellate courts down in Boston. You could actually get into those places and see it. So, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you into this. Oh, well, I guess I had to do this one last thing. Not that. This is one of the workshops we do takes you through this process. What I'm going to explain to you with the painting is I'm showing it to you in a little video, which I'll start playing and then hit pause for you from time to time and talk about. These are black and white studies where the whole entire purpose is to teach a student how to hit values and make light effects. And all we mean by light effects is spots where the light glows more than other spots. And they're made in various different ways. Sometimes they're highlights on an object. Sometimes they're joints where dark meets a light with a sharp edge. But the objective here is actually to find out how, well, for one thing, to learn how to darken your eyes, which is the crucial thing in our way of painting. You darken your eyes to find out what I tell students not to paint. So you're not trying to there's no mystery in it. What we're trying to do is to create the sense of order. And I refer to it as visual order. And there's literally things that are far more important than other things in pictures visually. And all we're trying to do here is get the student to look up there. If you darken your eyes, even looking at this picture, if you darken your eyes, or even looking at this whole space, you darken your eyes, you'll see what 2 or 3 things have the power. And it gives you so much control of the world. It's way different from the control of, well, somebody said earlier, is the hand the hardest thing to draw? Nothing's the hardest thing to draw. There's no hard thing to draw. It's when you simply obey the law of order. You know, there's an order that's purely what you call visual order. And so I'm going to save Degas for last. I'm going to bring up a point if I get to it, but I don't want to take too much more of our time. I want to go there. Okay, this is me. I did it. So this is the whole background. A marketing guy this is that guild story. The marketing guy came to me and he said, can people still paint like this? He was trying to figure out an angle for marketing. And he thought that might be a good one. Can people still paint like this? And he showed me this painting. This is a painting by Tarbell. And I said, yeah, of course. And he says, well, so let's do it. I, of course, had no idea what he meant. But immediately he wanted to hire cameras and just prove it. Well, that's not exactly what painters were good at. You know, we don't sit around there and show off our skills. You know, that's what violinists do on the stage. But we actually, you know, suddenly we get weak knees when you start talking about doing it in public places frequently. So that was the impetus. And by the way, I have to make one more connection for you, and that is Tarbell. He painted this portrait of this guy named Warren. Warren was the first president of Boston University. This is a side story. You know where Boston University started? Of all the strangest things? Newbury, Vermont. It was a Bible college in Newbury, Vermont. I don't know how they do it or what they had to do. They absconded with the Bible college, and it became Boston University. So right here in town. The second thing is that Tarbell's, one of his students, actually came into Piermont. He would come up here for some reason for vacations. And he was setting up a summer studio for Tarbell when Tarbell got cancer and was on it. You know, he wasn't going to be able to do it. Right here in the town of Piermont, though. So we have some connections to this happy little Boston school world before I go any further. But we're going to take this. So the challenge was, can we still do that? Okay. And so what I'm showing you now is me demonstrating whatever version of this. And I want you to ask questions about this to the limit of the time we have, as much as you want. So this is, so Mr. Producer rented cameras for 2 weeks. We had probably 13 days, not 14 days, but we had 2 weeks of camera. And they're expensive cameras and stuff like that. And he had, 2 or 3 of, I don't know how many he had. He had them in different places. But this is a slicked up version that only Mr. Producer and people like that can do. So the day got brighter, clouds came over, sun hit the clouds. Yeah, they're the doldrums. They're days when you don't think anything's going on. I sometimes set up a mirror so models can watch the process. And I tell them the only thing that's going to be interesting is the first 2 hours. So this part here, this is called thinking. Now, but you know, the funny thing is you have to have a concept of the thing fixed in your mind and eye. These are expressions in our world. You have to have a concept of the thing fixed in your mind and eye before you make a mark, before you make a single mark. So that's just letting you know. Now, see if I can make this happen enough to be useful to you. Okay, you got that much? This is as much as you're going to get of Monet. Okay. But this isn't haphazard stuff. This is a search for color relations and value relations in a picture. And so I'm setting up the darkest dark, guessing maybe it's here or maybe down here. I'm setting up what seems to me to possibly be the lightest light, or a couple of them, and I'm setting up the set of the colors that seem most significant and might cause me the biggest problems. And so that's the violin over there. So you're following that so far? Any questions?
Will those colors be present in the final product, or will they be covered up?
Well, so they'll be the basis of it. And so the way I work, and when that photograph I showed you, the one I said was 2 hours long, the portrait of the woman with the open shirt, that is true in color, and it's all I expect to do as it goes further is enhance the color, make it even more powerful. I learned way early in painting not to try to live with the safe colors you made, because you just make them worse and worse. So if anybody wants practical advice, that's one of the big ones. But you can see now that this becomes more of a search, like there's a movement from gold to red here. There's a movement from gold into other colors and down into a richer red in the tip of finger, sort of classic stuff that you'd probably recognize in yourself. And some color movements out here. And this is almost the beginning. See, here I'm starting to talk about establishing a point. So see, there's a whole series of things we establish. One is values. One is, see, color has three portions. One is values, one is chroma, and the other is hue. And hue is red, yellow, or blue. Most people think that's what color is, red, yellow, or blue, but it's actually those three components. And if you don't manage to sort that out, if you don't manage to sort that out, you'll take a way longer time trying to make a good likeness, and you'll have ups and downs like crazy. I speak to you as a person who's made every fool mistake there is to make. So you see what it is now. This is beginning to be significant articulation. I'm looking for the highest point that's significant in reading. Now I'm very aware of how far I want it from the top of the painting, and that's so there's a compositional thing going on. And I'm also aware of how far I want it left and right in the painting and trying to establish this thing. I would be looking through a viewfinder. Do you know what that is? Two 90-degree angles held together to form a box. So I'm trying to establish parameters, heights, length. So I'm setting things up. You'll see how this is going on. I'm putting in more time. This is what you call painting from the middle tones, though. This isn't putting in details. So there are painters even today, and it's a history of them, people who do essentially drawings, and then what they call window shading. You just paint the hair, and then you paint the forehead, and then you paint the nose and eyes, or whatever, and as you go down, you just keep filling it in. I've done illustration like that. It's very effective for certain things. But it isn't impressionist. It doesn't give you the same advantages of the search. And the impressionist model is one of searching for color relations, and you're beginning to see the whole field. This thing is going to be a dark painting. That wouldn't have showed itself to you before. It's all speculation before, as you talk about the notes you're hoping will work. But so the changes you're going to see happening are going to be because you're going to learn more. So remember, I always tell students the first marks you make are question marks. They're also the dumbest ones you're going to make because you don't have any information. You're just guessing about stuff, you know. But once you get 2 or 3 marks out there, and everything we do is about the relationships of things. So this is the darkest dark, and that's the lightest light. It tells everybody else, gives them an idea where to be. If that over there is the most chromatic color, that tells all the other skin tones how chromatic to be. Do you see what I mean? So it's all about setting parameters, or what some people call keying a painting. But we're trying to get the canvas covered. The idea is to cover the canvas in 2 hours. Now, I used to tell students, we were taught to think in terms of covering the canvas in a half hour. And it's just a fool's errand. You know, you wanted just a big mess. Why would you waste an entire skin of canvas with that crap? You know, so excuse my expression, but you have to get to places where you have these very important things. Now, this is what we call effects, where dark meets light, and with an edge, it actually pops light. So what you'll see in that unfinished, that study down here, that's a demo down on the right there, is you'll see that light is there right from the beginning. You're painting the light. And it's a values problem, but it's also a color meets color problem, and it's also a chroma meets chroma problem. So it's a significant problem. I sometimes describe what we're doing as we paint color value units and what happens where they meet. And our world is kind of fun because it's just been reduced to that. Way back in the time of Ruskin, which is early 1800s, that whole conversation was already out there about the naive eye. And the naive eye is the eye that doesn't know what a thing is. And what you'll find as a painter in our type of world is that as soon as you know what the thing is, or, oh, I see what that is, you can't paint it anymore. I could describe it this way. I remember sitting, not infrequently, but when I was first living up here, 30 years ago, looking out the window of our place in some beautiful morning and just seeing this most spectacular color up in the trees. And I said, and I was just stunned by it. And instead of having the brains to just say, thank you, Lord, I just looked up in the trees and said, what is that? And then I couldn't see it anymore. That's kind of the reality that the Impressionists are trying to get you to buy into. You know, it's the naive, but is it really naive? You know, in fact, the reason I wanted to show you those paintings by Whistler and Degas is because we eventually find out that's where the music is. You can get out of the realism and let's talk about the music of the eye. So that's a whole world that essentially Monet, but previously even people like Velázquez was opening up to us. Were opening up to us. Do you have questions about this moment? Y'all, I'm good. How about now? Do you know this is a search? Everything on here is a search. That's the voice described by a Boston School painter. It's a search. It's a search for so many things. Of course, it's just a search for the likeness. But there's so many pieces of data that you have to manage in this thing. I remember one guy who was a computer guy. He came up to me, or an internet guy, whatever, a computer, and he said, "What you do is such a mystery." I said, "You're so kidding. Nobody can even see what you guys do." But what? How in the heck are all these pictures on my little hand, right in my little hand? And you talk about this being a mystery, but you know, it is a bit of a mystery, isn't it? But it isn't a mystery if you accept what I'm saying is so, that it's just about colors and values now that relate to each other. It really isn't a mystery. They do make things like shapes and things like that, but it changes it and makes it accessible. You know what I mean? And we need it to be that accessible if we're going to separate ourselves into the world of what I call music. You know, for the purposes of painting, you have to be operating that way. Now, do you see more events? These are effect events, right? These things are all, now we're living in a world that's called point angle decisively, right? So you see the importance we have to establish. This is establishing points for the purposes of getting other points right. And so what it is this point has to be rightly related to other points. You're actually literally looking for points. And earlier on, you're floating these points a bit, right? So we're massing it out, but we're actually trying to establish these points. And so I don't automatically mass first, I frequently point first. Degas once said, anybody who drew a line with that much authority must have known where he was starting and where he was going to end. That's called point thinking. Okay. It's the same thing with color or chroma or values or anything, and it's true of the location of stuff on the page. And we have a word for that. I use the word arabesque, the figure created by the leading, in my case, points of a composition. The definition is leading lines of a composition. But so it is the figure. So it's a figure. It's like a triangle. Right here you can see a triangle. You can actually see in that triangle whether it's the right width to height. You can actually see which way it's tilted. So we're accessing pure data with pure data. Pure abstraction, if you want to put it that way. Do you see what I mean? So we're not really trying to do we're not doing a likeness in the old-fashioned way at all, but it's absolutely a likeness, but it's in a different place, right? It's living, it's staying, it's trying to refrain from getting into the world of what that is. I remember the first time I was actually doing this successfully, I actually did a self-portrait, and I thought, that's it. And then I immediately started to put realism into it, and it wasn't it. Something died. Something funny happened on the way to the forum? Was that the one? So, but yeah, so a lot of the stuff out here is fairly tentative discussions, but there's a whole lot of stuff that's trying to find itself. It's trying to actually be sure. It's trying to really get there. And that's true of the color as well. And so the closer you have to a real definite edge with a joint like that, the closer you get, the clearer you are about your colors. In other words, when they start touching and they have the right edge quality, you can actually have much more clarity about whether it's doing exactly the right thing compared to this spot over here or to that spot over there. We do work from the outside in. You need to know that. We work from the outside here, way big outside. We're interested in this shape, right? We're working from the outside in. You'll hear people today talking about working from the eye and then the nose, and then they just work from that. You're nodding. Somebody over here plays this game, don't you? Oh, so sorry, guys. Where's the water tube that goes with this? It's got to be something. All right. But you can see how this is starting to become, this is what we call an exit. So we're trying to locate things. This is the composition. The entire way through a painting, you're doing a composition. This series of spots are balanced on the page. You're always trying to maintain that. You have the vision of the composition fixed in your mind and eye through the viewfinder, admittedly. But it is fixed in your mind and eye. Or you will be, as who said it, you'll be chasing shapes around all day long. You'll get so lost. You have to know what the concept is compositionally, right? If nothing more, you need to see what the color scheme is. Do you see how that's composition, color scheme, the colors go together? You know, if you think of yourself as, I've heard some women describe themselves as being composed when they dress. Have you heard, some of you heard that? I hadn't heard it until fairly recently. She's well composed. That could have meant, of course, that she was just maintaining her emotions. But no, in this case, it was about the color of the clothes and how they beautifully. So the color scheme is composition. It's got nothing to do with all sorts of other stuff, which also has to do with composition. I better keep going here, though. Any other thoughts you want to get involved in? Go for it. Now, this is that change of a day. What happened here, this is called the flashlight effect. I had to paint for 13 straight days. We couldn't take a day off, and the model was there for these 3 hours every morning. That was all we had. And when you're painting a portrait professionally, you frequently have to deal with this. What do you do when everything's changed? All your color relations have changed and all that sort of stuff. Well, you figure how to tread water without losing time. So that's the thing that's happening here. So let me just back this up for a second before that happened, because I wanted to talk about one thing. So, no, I guess actually we probably covered enough. Are there any questions about where we are so far? What you're seeing so far? You'll have to yell, because I'm having a hard time seeing anything like a hand. So, all right, so let's just go past that part where we're talking about the light going weird. But you see immediately in this day, so that's one of those things you can do. You can work on things that have just to do with drawing, but you're at some risk. But the day had definitely changed some. Now, so my rule of thumb in this way of working, though, is if you just have setting out these first few points, you saw that was fairly crude, but it was the best I could do with what I knew at the time. And it was adequately the look of nature, but the more times around through this thing and the more subdivisions you make, the more knowledge you're going to have. So this wasn't drawn as a sharp-edged unit. It was drawn with form. So it actually looks, but I'm not trying to do anatomy. Form is what dark meets a light and has a middle tone turning on it, whatever. You know, that sort of thing, or something that happens in the transitions between light and dark. And they produce a sense of the roundness at that spot. Well, it's just a coincidence. I'm just saying when you draw this, you aren't going to make it sharp-edged like the back of the ear or the back of the neck. Those relationships are all, so the edge suddenly comes into play. Well, it was always in play. All the horses at once is a Boston School motto. All the horses at once and all over the place at once. Isn't that interesting? So it's a fascinating thing that you're always after with this thing we call the backstraggler. It's that thing that's least like when you're looking at the thing as a whole. And we used to get agendas. You know, the thing that'll really kill you is to get a plan for, I'm going to do this hand today. Well, the truth is, if you're looking at the whole, the hand may be where there's a big problem, but there may be one little aspect of it. But in fact, you have 3 other things that you need to work on too. So you have to figure out how to maintain. And the one thing you're saying, what you're trying to maintain is the unity of the general impression. I'll give you one famous aphorism from Baron Gros, who's another one of the academics post-David. I think he was a contemporary of Ingres, who was also a David background. But he said, you want to paint your painting so that at any moment, suppose you were to drop dead, your family could actually sell the thing. Well, the only way you can sell a painting by definition, by art by definition, by the way, the word art means a unity. The word is so intrinsically allied with art. So it has to be in harmony. Well, you would have said before I got this far, it didn't look like much of anything. But all that I had in there was in unity, with the color relations are right to each other and all that stuff. And it's a search for this first level of unity. But everything that you put in after then, though, has to do with being right to everything else that's already in there. And we're always setting up and enhancing things like this powerful light, because that dark meets that light with that powerful effect, and having it right to any other ones that might be coming into the room, and all these things being right to each other all the way through, as you want to keep that going. Other thoughts about that? That looks easy, doesn't it? Yeah. So, yeah. One of those days again. I'm wondering how I did some of those things. I'm thinking I was crazy. Why were you just still doing stuff like that? Oops. We didn't have perfect days, did we, Mr. Producer? I better stop here. Do you see what's happening? Did anybody have thoughts about that? Should I go back? But what's happening is we're working from the greater to the lesser, from the biggest shapes and forms. The arm could be thought of as a tube, the head as a ball or an egg, et cetera, et cetera. I don't mean we paint eggs in that way, but there's an essential necessity to think about major forms so you don't get lost in 40 forms that you might otherwise find, like in the hand. So if you think of a hand, Ang does this so beautifully if you look at certain of his drawings. If you think of a hand, it's actually a bowl, or it's a ball. That's the essential form of a hand. It's so crucial that you think that way. That's like the idea of thinking from the middle tones. It's from the greater unifying idea of the area. So that's just a form, a way of thinking of it, as it applies to form. So that's very much on your mind that you're getting that bowl, that cupping of the hand, the inverted bowl or whatever it is. Now, one of the things you want to hear about is that when visual order means we actually are trying to find and establish the powerful points and then the minor ones. So things like this have taken a while to show up. That's low contrast stuff. When you're young, you just get greedy for that, or you think that's the thing, or certain reflected lights that might be in little places like this, and just before you know it, you're lost in stuff that's very, very minor and unimportant. So, but yeah, so thinking that way, yeah. I'll be happy to go back if anybody wants to somewhere along this way, but let's just keep going. Another one of these brilliant days. It's possible this was actually the good day. Maybe the other ones were just too dark, New England being what it is. Are you with me? Do you see the incredibly greater nuanced stuff that's starting to happen in places like the face? You're allowed to go in. If the majors are established, you're allowed to go in. In fact, you have to. And we work from the center of interest area out. When it comes to that, if you want to make a mistake, so to speak, out of unity, having the part that's the busiest, most worked, is not a bad scheme. You always have to be stepping into new territory in a painting, And so the new territory is the level of articulation, the amount of things you're drawing, those sorts of things. That's the new territory. So there's a wise way to do it is do it in an important area. The hand being not unimportant either. But so that's what you're seeing here. And that's the joy of, when you have major things established, there's this whole thing that starts happening and you get like these rewards, But the thing is, you have to pursue all the little stuff here with the attempt to maintain or even improve, rather, the big light, the big color. And the big relationships all through the entire thing. Are things coming across in a sort of a plausible way? Yeah. Well, there's your violin. Now that's low contrast stuff. It's the high chroma, but you see there's no silhouettes. The contrast thing is a silhouette game. It's visual effects. They're basically strong silhouettes versus weak silhouettes. Low contrast, dark meets light, dark meets middle tone, different kinds of effects. So if you follow that idea, this area is late because it has very low effects. But the game, I'm just simply staying within my modus operandi, And so this is a thing, the colorist-minded person, and Delacroix gets such a horrible rap from the academic guy I studied with. And by the way, I've never been a fan of Delacroix's work, but his conversation, he's a colorist, and he thinks by painting with mass and with color, and bringing the drawing around. And it really does, it really is another way to think. It's the other way to think. The outline of objects is one way. It's the classic academic way. But this is the other way. Some people simply say more painterly and a few things like that, but that's just, it was a true thing. The impressionist I studied with said, you'd say to you, is that a painting or is that a colored drawing? Does that sound familiar? And so you'd be working away, putting these flecks up on the board like Monet, as you're doing figures and portraits and trying to get the drawing right, you know. But that was theirs, and they're equally snide ones coming from the other camp. So here's fun stuff. Look at that nice wobbly thing. That might have been that should have been done earlier than this. I might have had a really good reason, but who knows what. But low contrast stuff, even the form down here might be low. This stuff in here is lower contrast. So you see that would have come in later, the highlights in here even. Sometimes highlights should be there early and often. It's just part of the visual bang. If you darken your eyes, you can tell, though, whether they should be there. And sometimes you don't need to have them in early anyway, even though they may be part of the general impression. I'm ready for questions or a discussion point.
How do you darken your eyes?
Okay, so the easiest thing for you to do, you should do it like right now, just close one and just shut the other one. Don't blur your eyes. Don't try to go blurry. Just shut it. And then start opening it up real slow. And you'll see, as you're shutting it, you'll start seeing just a few spots of light left around. And now you don't paint with your eyes shut down like that. You just identify what you're not going to paint. Or you could say you identify what you are going to paint or draw. But it's the thing, what you blur down, you're going to be painting that which you can still see. And if you darken a lot, you don't have many things to paint. And so the expression is paint as if you were coming out of a fog. That's where it finally registered with me, because I was trying to find a most practical order to get all the good stuff in a painting. And the outline-based model of the academics was not the best. And all I wanted to do was, I'd been taught that your grounding as a painter, no matter what kind of painter you want to be, is if you can't paint what's in front of you exactly the way it looks, you've got a problem. And so best practices were, for me, was I just kept painting this academic way, and I just would continue to have problems. I couldn't find my way out of them. So you have to find yourself more accurate than an academic, would you believe? But the only way to do it is by walking into the impressionist world. Velázquez was possibly the most accurate painter that had ever lived up to his time in the first half of his life, and then he switched to impressionism. At the end of his life, these two paintings, and you walk into the Prado, they tell me, I mean, I've heard this from multiple people, you walk in the Prado, and once you've seen those two pictures, you stop looking at anything else, because they contain all the grand atmosphere of an entire space, which is way more comprehensive than what people look like individually, or tables look like in perspective and all that stuff. Did I answer your question? Yes. Yeah. Now we're back to that again, so yeah. This is where the thing wants to pause on us. So you see the color of the day changing? Is this nuts? Why is it blue this day? Did you change lenses on that camera, Mr. Producer? You always try to blame the model. Do you see what's happening now? You see the evolution of a powerful light. Now, sometimes you don't paint every light that's brilliant. You may need that information, but sometimes you don't do it because it's little. So there is a greater to lesser thing. But it's not always the smartest thing not to know about that thing. A thing like that, because that's got some real serious punch. And you may find what you don't want in a painting is to find yourself getting to the end and all of a sudden there's a powerful effect you can't make because you've already used up all your lights. So we don't paint, in fact, the first note you saw me put down, I don't paint whites white, I paint them with color. I want them to be darker than the white of the canvas. And I also want them to be colored. So that whole model all of a sudden puts you in a whole other place. You had all these problems when you're a young student of painting because of white, trying to get the light with white. I had students who would last for a lot of years, and they just keep on, their default color of light was white. Didn't know how to get it with chroma and hue and contrast.
Can you explain the chroma and hue?
Yeah. So if you look at this area, well, actually, we could even just look at this area over here. Do you see all these colors that are all up and down this whole screen? This is the richest one, isn't it? That's the one you can easily see as the most color in it. It's called saturation. Do you know that term? That's the most intense color. It's the most saturated colors. Right? And maybe this one would be the second one. Do you see what I mean now? Is it coming across? That's what we mean. It's intensity of the color. It's the saturation of the color, but it's what we mean by chroma. That's all. And a lot of people don't use that word. It's a common one, A lot of people use intensity or saturation. But if you're looking at this picture, and again, pop your eyes at a picture like this, or you can blur your eyes by popping your eyes, and you might be able to see more easily which is the richest color. If you turn your eyes to the side a little bit, like this color here, there's a very rich place here. This might be richer than anything on the face. I don't know. Is that piece of the ear richer? I don't know. But that rich is another word, by the way. So we're using those terms all interchangeably. So is this the most powerful piece of chroma? Maybe right here on the entire violin. By the way, I appreciated your question earlier. I apologize, I'm forgetting your name. How could I forget your name? But what? Jake. Yes, man, a very memorable name. Sorry, Jake. But he said something about painting the wood. Is it hard to paint the textures or the look of wood? The wood grain is what you said, yeah. And I said, I don't paint anything, actually. I just do what the color does. When the color says jump, you jump, that's all. And if the values move, you move. And if they have sharp edges, you make them sharp and not soft, and then vice versa. And all of a sudden, you have wood grain. And it's not, and that's the sort of the silliness of this. But I want to tell you something funny about this, and I don't know where he got it, but Mr. Producer, just to plug your ears, but he was a little kid. I think he was 4, and he said, and I set out to climb up out of a chair. He'd been sitting there across from me. And he said, "Don't move, Dad, don't move." And I said, "What are you doing?" "Well, never mind, don't move." But I figured he must be doing a portrait. And I finally said, "Okay, we're all set." And I came around, and he had done this portrait of me with dots. He did dots like this. And it was actually working. But it's a mentality, it's a whole different mentality, Why did I mention that? I had a reason right there. So, yeah, maybe you've seen enough, I don't know, or had enough discussion. If there's more here. Again, those crazy hot days, that's the clouds coming in. The washed out look is definitely hot clouds. Gamma used to call it the flashlight effect. But these are days, remember the 13 days, you're probably seeing literally 13 changes. And some of them with their clouds floating by, they're changing while you work. So you see flash out, in, out, in, out. We still love North Light better than anything else. It's got the best chroma, and it just takes a little more patience. But patience is one of the things you got to learn anyway to be this kind of a painter. So it goes with the territory, as I said. But look at that goofy glare on the wall and stuff like that. It's just silly. Sometimes it's hard to see the painting. So eventually you get around to actually shooting a line like that one. And getting things like, there's some idea of the texture of the dress, some other odd things happening in the dress. Timing, it's just timing. If you see anything else, it's interesting. What you did see me doing for a while there was moving the hands all over the place. Do you remember seeing that? They were, all right. If that's good, I'm good. If you guys want to talk, we can we can maybe just turn the lights on and we can just talk about the picture here if you want to, or whatever, or we can call it a night. I do workshops, and it was really the kindness of Whitaker and Ali, a former student from England, who took me over to London. And it was fun going through the museums and feeling like I was walking through the pages of a book. That's all I could think. I know all this stuff. I know this stuff by heart. But there's the Rokeby Venus standing right in front of you there, or a great painting by Veronese. But that's where this came from, and so this is the culmination, if you want to call it that. Sorry, it doesn't show with this light now, but that's the culmination of the question, and he was trying to do that as a marketing idea. So can we still paint like this? But the big question is there a reason to still paint like this? Because I don't know what the world has done. They try to torque us into something we're not, but I just stayed with the love. I just went with my own instincts, my own guts, and I didn't have any interest in modern art. Sorry. And it wasn't, I don't have an attitude. I don't talk about it. I just talk about beauty and truth. And this is our resource. But at some point, I wish you could see this just a little bit better, but at some point you're talking about with the whole thing is painting has now come back, come to a, I would say, Degas once said painting doesn't, I think he would have been meaning evolved, it doesn't expand. It just keeps returning to itself. And that's a fascinating, that's a wholly fascinating idea, but this is what painting is and what it forever is. It's music. And I don't care what realism, what great story. I mean, I was reading something recently about Regnault, a great 19th century painter, who died at 47 in one of those nasty wars over there. But they were all talking about what important thing they were going to say. And I remember being like a 30-something student thinking, say? I'm such an idiot. I can't figure out painting, and I'd have something to say, But these are the days. Well, so you'd just take somebody's theme. You'd take an important story out of history, or you'd take something like that, and you just paint an illustration of it. But I think this is actually the point of painting. I think is actually something else. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we do that like, for example, just having a skill like this. I think it's inspiring to other people. So that's a big deal all by itself. But the second piece of that is, it's an art form. Dance isn't about something. You just have your eyes agog. You're stunned. What? And something, there used to be in Italy there was an expression, but the definition of the word art was wow. It was in that class. This one guy would use that word. It's just wow. Well, you could say, well, is that entertainment? What is that? Well, that's kind of our problem, is to figure that out for ourselves. But what brought you to the dance is what I always ask people. So anytime you're in this little world, the impressionist world and all that sort of stuff, it's always coming back to that. What brought you to the dance and what keeps bringing us back to it. So if you don't have more discussion, I'm good. I've probably exhausted you. Did I go too long? Undoubtedly. Yeah, please. You. Yeah, did you raise your hand? Oh, you didn't? Oh, oh, sorry. I was hoping.
I don't know enough to ask the question.
I was going to compare this to writing. They say that in writing, I learned this from Eleanor, that writing is rewriting. And every time you go out here and put a note down, all you're doing is adjusting notes. But you're doing them in a relationship. And what you find, if you really want to hear the music in painting, in color, is just get two other notes into the same space in your brain. So you're talking about darkening your eyes to see that. Well, try to get three colors into the same space in your brain. And when you start seeing three notes, your mouth might fall open, because that's a whole other world. And once you get engaged in that world of the relationship, Michelangelo talked about it. He was talking about this beautiful curve on a figure. And he said, and how it picks up this other curve, he called it counterpoint. There's this interplay of shape. But it's the same thing. It's crazy stuff. And if you can't get to the three, you're not in music yet, are you? But I'm sure it's the same way. In writing, it's the great plot, the big storyline. Keep that fixed in your brain, no matter what little piece you do, and you don't wreck I learned from you guys. Well, yeah.
You take lights, darks, whatever you have, they just look like blobs, but in a certain way. But just gradually, then you keep bringing out the sharp delineation between the light and the dark.
Yeah. Well, it's a research project. The first thing is you're going to paint, you're going to draw something, but you're going to have to use some color. So you've got to find out what the color's up to. So the spots are just, it's Monet, just color, just put them around there. And then before you know it, you say, but they're drawing. I got to get this thing in the right place on the page. And that's where you start talking about effects, because the dark meets a light. That's what people used to do line, but we don't do line. Once you become an impressionist, you do effects. You do joints where dark meets light. So that's when you start seeing the drawing, and that's why I say it's about getting this point lined up with this point down here. So now you have something that we could call drawing, and there's some shapeness to it and all that stuff. So, but no, we'll talk more. That's a long discussion. But I love the parallels. I've talked to a mathematician. I mean, it doesn't matter who I talk to, there's fantastic parallels in these worlds, and as well as to the spiritual world. So, enjoy the whole thing. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. Thank you very much. you.